From the updated graphics to the crazy skill shots, there's really no debating that Call of Dragons is a superior game to Rise of Kingdoms, but that doesn't mean that you'll like it more. In this video, I'm going to go over the differences between these two games, between the end game and the civilization choices, the commander choices, the collection aspects of the game. We're going to cover it all, and trust me, I have spent the last 4.5 years living city building war games inside out and backwards, and I've spent over $100,000 just on Rise of Kingdoms alone. So I know this genre pretty damn well. So stick around in this video for the things you need to know about Call of Dragons and how it compares and stacks up to Rise of Kingdoms. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and if you're new to the channel, as I mentioned in the intro, I have made over 2,000 videos about Rise of Kingdoms, so I'm pretty well qualified to talk about how Rise of Kingdoms would compare to another game. And Call of Dragons is a game that I plan to play a lot of when there is the global launch, which is only a few weeks away. In fact, I plan to spend probably $5,000 in the first month, and at the time of this recording, I'm not actually sponsored for Call of Dragons. I'm just moving in because I think it's going to be a good game, and I think it's going to be long-lasting. But with that said, as I mentioned, there are some really big differences between Call of Dragons and Rise of Kingdoms, and if you're trying to figure out if this is a game you want to play, well, this video will help you out. Now, if you are looking for a group for Call of Dragons, I'll take a moment to plug the group linked in the description. There's going to be a Discord server for the group I'm forming, which should be really insane, but also really hardcore. If you want to play casually, it might not be the right place. But let's get started with all that ceremony out of the way to compare the following things. We're going to look at the map design and the endgame KvK design or equivalent across these two games. The end game is really where you're going to spend the most of your time. And I know that with city building war games, it takes maybe even like 9 months to a year and a half to actually get to the end game. But what happens when you're there? That's what we're going to talk about at the start. We're going to talk about civilizations and the differences between them in these games. We're going to talk about the talents and commanders and equipment, basically the collectibles in the game. And we're going to talk about the combat system, because they're very different across these two games. Now, I've been showing you footage from Call of Dragons, but we're going to switch back and forth between the two. In fact, let's jump in game. This is my 100% free-to-play 12 million power account that I've been running very casually over the last 6 months in the closed or also sort of regional beta testing that has been done for Call of Dragons. And I would say that I have learned a lot about the game, but almost immediately, as I scroll around, you'll start to see that the map and its features are in many ways superior to Rise of Kingdoms. I mean, if I zoom out and we find a river over here, all right, here's what a river looks like in Call of Dragons. Let me flip to Rise of Kingdoms and show you a river over there. I mean this lovingly, but it almost like is shocking to your eyes when you switch from Call of Dragons back to Rise of Kingdoms to see how freaking bland this map looks compared to the Call of Dragons map. The trees look stale. The mountains, I mean, these mountains look pretty cool. I guess these look all right. But compared to Call of Dragons, it's just not even close. The map just looks way cooler. In fact, if I switch back to Call of Dragons, not only do they have all these cool features, but there are also special sort of locations on the map that you can discover. I don't know if I've scouted any for this current season that look insane, but the mountains in this game not only block off territory, but there's actually elevation. I mean, you can have units that fly, you can have units that are on the high ground over here that shoot down into the low ground. The map and the intricacies associated with it in Call of Dragons are just dramatically superior to Rise of Kingdoms. It's not even close. Even the way that you construct buildings in this game is extremely different. But as I mentioned in the intro, that's not necessarily something you'll like more. The way that this works in Call of Dragons is that to go build something, a bunch of troops need to go stand around the object and build it. So if you want to build a flag, your troops just stand there out in the open, building the flag. They can be attacked by other players. I mean, trying to build territory feels a little bit like watching grass grow if you have to protect it, which is not a way that I particularly like spending my time watching grass grow. Now, if you have enemies to fight off, okay, you've got something to do. But what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to building and destroying buildings, I actually prefer the mechanics to Rise of Kingdoms, and let me show you that. Although buildings in both games have a durability, and the two games have that in common, in Rise of Kingdoms, you actually reinforce flags and forts, and you need to have a captain in order to defend them. And yes, there are passes in Call of Dragons. Yes, there are forts that you can defend in Call of Dragons and garrison. But a lot of the structures you fight over, there actually aren't any garrisons at all. So the emphasis in Call of Dragons is far more on the open field. And as someone who really likes the rally and garrison mechanics in Rise of Kingdoms, this is a very, very different experience than in Call of Dragons. Now, one aspect of Call of Dragons that I just think is insanely cool compared to the mechanics in Rise of Kingdoms is the sort of holy sites that you get. There are these behemoths, and in Call of Dragons, you actually have to fight the behemoth, beat the behemoth, and then you can summon the behemoth, who will then ultimately fight on your behalf, which is really, really cool. I mean, in Rise of Kingdoms, you just have these really derpy temple guards that, I mean, like, sure, I suppose it qualifies as a DPS check, but, like, they mostly just stand around and they're a really easy kill. No, no, no. In Call of Dragons, I gotta hand it to the map design, and specifically these behemoths are just like way cooler than any holy site in Rise of Kingdoms. And although I think the map is just way cooler in Call of Dragons, I mean, here is actually one of these holy sites I was talking about, or actually, I guess, points of interest. I mean, look at the graphics on this, man. This is just so much cooler than anything you'll find in Rise of Kingdoms from a graphic standpoint. Okay, now that said, I've talked a lot about the map. There is some weirdness to the map. And this has to do with seasons versus KvKs, okay? The way that things work in Call of Dragons is that you'll have a season, okay? And over the course of the season, you'll re-explore the map, you'll go in and you'll conquer a bunch of behemoths, you'll conquer other players, and at the end of the season, a whole bunch of stuff resets. Your heroes reset their level. Your artifacts, which we'll talk about later, reset as well. The map resets, and there's a server merge, and you move into a brand new version of the exact same map, and you battle against new people. This is very different than Rise of Kingdoms, and although I love the look of the map, this aspect of the map function I actually prefer in Rise of Kingdoms than I do in Call of Dragons. I don't know what it is. I actually have played other games that have map resets where it feels like a new season brings a whole new world of possibilities where you can genuinely try new and different strategies and really move all in on them. And it's a very different experience each time you do that. But in Call of Dragons, it just kind of feels like you're doing the same thing over again. And there is reward. I mean, if you're a grinder, let me tell you, there's huge reward to being super active at the start of the season. You really have to be, because as you can see here, I mean, all my heroes are reset to level 1. My artifacts are reset to level 1. We'll go over the artifacts and the heroes more in a little bit, but this is very different than Rise of Kingdoms. And I actually would say I prefer the KvK aspect of Rise of Kingdoms. Let me show you that real quick. In Rise of Kingdoms, your kingdom signs up for one of many different kingdom versus kingdom formats. And not only is each of these experiences very different than the next, but also every time you queue up, it can be a completely different experience depending on who you fight for or with or against. So even when the map is completely the same and you've done it before, you can just have a very different experience every time you play. And it is really cool, by the way, having a home kingdom. I mean, a group of people that you always play with, that is a safe place to be, that is a fun place to be, that is the people you love to play with, in the same alliance you love to play with. Everything is upended in a new season of Call of Dragons. I mean, the table is flipped, baby. It's a whole new endeavor every time you do it. Even your alliance technology starts all over again. You have to build all new territory. Now, there's things about that that's really cool, okay, in Call of Dragons. But I think between these two endgame mechanics, my actual preference is a killer home kingdom where you're aligned with the people you're aligned with, and you go into KvKs and you've got clearly defined enemies and you fight them. And I think one shortcoming that I'm sure the developers for Call of Dragons will look at over time is the fact that you can kind of just switch to the winning alliance in Call of Dragons mid-fight. And at some point, everybody just jumps ship from the losing team and tries to join the winning team. And like, it's the end of the fight prematurely because everybody jumps ship to try to go on the side that's going to win. Now, sometimes, and again, maybe down the road, those rivalries and those grudges will be more of a contentious thing. Maybe it's just the beginning of the game for Call of Dragons and people haven't really had strong alliance identities, so everybody's just going to be wishy-washy and play with whoever's winning. But I don't know. I am a little concerned about that endgame mechanic, if I'm being fully honest and transparent, which I aspire to be. Now, that said, the game is still very new. I mean, even just over the last 6 months, developers have made a lot of really killer, that's good, really good changes to Call of Dragons that I think have really advanced the game in good ways. So it's entirely possible that this will change dramatically. And Lord knows that Rise of Kingdoms changed profoundly over the course of its existence. I mean, in Rise of Kingdoms, you used to be able to migrate to a winning KvK kingdom and collect all the rewards. So like, you know, Call of Dragons is still very much a growing game, which I mention that because you got to keep in mind that's what you're signing up for, a game that presumably will only get better from here. Now, with that said, let's compare the sort of idea of civilizations that you have in Rise of Kingdoms to the civilizations you have, or really factions, in Call of Dragons. Because just like in Rise of Kingdoms, this aspect is nearly identical. There are 3 factions. Each one gets a extra amount of collectibles for a specific hero. So in Rise of Kingdoms, you get sculptures. Here, you also get what you need to upgrade a specific hero associated with your faction. You also get special units associated with your faction, similar to how you do in Rise of Kingdoms, but I think there's much more nuance to it here. And you also get some faction bonuses, just like how you get civilization bonuses in Rise of Kingdoms. So these Spring Wardens, for example, have Legion March Speed and Healing Speed. But one thing that is very different in Call of Dragons and Rise of Kingdoms is the troops and the mechanics associated with those troops. Because in Rise of Kingdoms, look, you're either archers, cavalry, infantry, or you're siege, which, I mean, okay, siege are countered by everything. But in this game, not only do you have all these different troop types, in this game, in fact, you have a new troop type. It is a magic troop type, which is kind of cool. Here they are. It's different, by the way, for each faction. For this faction here, it's the Vestals, but if I were to switch over here to Wilderberg, their magic unit is a satyr, and these are witches. But there's actually a difference between physical damage in this game and magic damage. Now, Rise of Kingdoms has no physical damage, magic damage. This is all like a brand new and also a little bit complicated concept to understand once you start initially playing the game, which is that different units and different heroes do different damage types. This also means there's a lot of opportunity to sort of specialize what you're doing. But for example, you can see here that this unit does magic damage, whereas I can do this unit over here, it's doing physical attacks, physical damage. This flying unit for Wilderberg does physical damage, but the flying unit for the League of Order does magic damage. So there's definitely more nuance to your faction choices, the equivalent of a civilization, than there is in Rise of Kingdoms. Although, at the start of the game, the core mechanic is the same here. You're going to pick a faction based off of which hero you want more of, and then you'll switch later to the one where you want the troops and you want the benefit. One other difference between the troops in this game and the troops in Rise of Kingdoms is gone are the sort of siege units that are, besides ranged combat, now added recently to Rise of Kingdoms, otherwise not worth very much. You've got a dedicated gathering unit, a tier 1 gathering unit associated with each faction. And this is kind of cool because, you know, unlike in Rise of Kingdoms where you gather with siege and your siege are countered by everything, here each faction has its own dedicated troop for gathering, and there actually is a bonus for using that troop for gathering. So for example, the Wilderberg Work Rhinos gain extra resources when they exhaust a resource point. I mean, that's kind of cool, actually. This is different than League of Order, where here it says you have higher load capacity. Different from Spring Wardens, where here you get faster march speed when moving toward a resource point. So I actually like the differences and the nuances of the troops in this game. In fact, I think that sophistication and additional complexity is why there's only 3 factions. Because adding another faction actually does add a lot of sort of complexity to it, and I hope they will add more in the future. But for now, picking one of these 3 doesn't actually determine who your allies can be or who you can play with. It's just determining the bonuses, the hero you start with, and the different troop types that you have available. Now, of course, much like how in Rise of Kingdoms, collecting heroes is a huge part of what you'll be doing, this is true in Call of Dragons, very much so. And every single season, they're reset, and you'll have choices about which ones you work on first and level up. And there are, of course, different rarities of hero. There are legendary heroes, and some of the graphics I really like. I think Garwood actually looks pretty cool for a hero. And some of the graphics I'm maybe not as keen on. But there are epic heroes. There are blue quality heroes. I actually can't remember offhand what rarity this actually qualifies as, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that there's different rarities of heroes. The legendary ones are the best. And the way that their skills work is just very similar to Rise of Kingdoms. Instead of having stars like you do in Rise of Kingdoms, you have medals. Using more medals on a commander unlocks more skills, and the sequence in which you level up skills really matters. You always want to max the first skill. I mean, this is very similar to Rise of Kingdoms, but there are some choices that are very different with your heroes. Much like in Rise of Kingdoms, you have talents. However, the talents in this game are certainly different looking. Now, you still do have trees, and those trees have progression. You need prior points to unlock later points. But there are some decision points. You can't get both of the major talent points, as you see over here, for example. You ultimately have to choose between cool-headed or furious. You have to choose between ready for battle or iron will. And of course, you're choosing among these 3 trees because you can't actually do them all. So although every hero or commander has some of the same starting talents, they're called foundation talents, the way you specialize them can definitely vary and matters a lot. And there is some differentiation around the way that you do a talent build in this game than how you do it in Rise of Kingdoms. In fact, talent resets in this game are not readily available, and they are shockingly expensive, considering that it would be really easy to make a wrong build for a commander. So the intention is you basically make a build, use it for a season, and probably aren't resetting it many times within the same season. If we flip back to Rise of Kingdoms, I mean, you can see I've collected a lot of commanders here and spent a ridiculous amount of money on that, and I've spent a ridiculous amount of money on my legendary equipment, and even though the armament system is relatively new, I've spent a lot of money on this as well. Now, there aren't any armaments in Call of Dragons. There isn't any equipment in Call of Dragons. Instead, they've got a system called artifacts. The artifact system, in my opinion, is really, really cool and is something I really like about this game. The way that an artifact works is that you only have 1 per hero, which is a nice change of pace. It's much easier to manage 1 thing per hero than the, 8 pieces of equipment per hero plus 4 armaments. And then you've got all these marches, 1 artifact per hero. It does give you stats as you level it up and as you star it up, but also it has an ability, and the game is showing you here kind of what that ability looks like. There are many different artifacts with many different abilities, ranging from damage to, in this case, I've got a healing ability where you can literally target another march and heal it. So if I bring some of these marches out into the field real quick, which is unfortunately something I haven't actually done all season this season. I can't even bring a secondary hero because I haven't leveled them up yet. GG. I mean, you really need to play every single season extremely actively, especially at the start of the season. While I'm walking, allow me to take a moment to appreciate the unit complexity in this game. Not only are there more unit types than just Barbarians, which is what you get in Rise of Kingdoms, but there are Darklings, there are dark creatures, and then there are also the sort of guardians of holy sites, in this game, equivalent of the Behemoths, which are a little different as well. Okay, you got these guys over here, which, I mean, dude, I already talked about graphics, but like these look so much cooler. I get that he's kind of hiding behind the tree right now. But also these Darklings, there are different unit types. So these are archers, there are warlocks, there are infantry, there are also, you know, cavalry. All right, whatever. We're going to take all our units here. We're going to swing in. GG, I have to defeat a level 2 first. Hold up. I suppose this aspect of Call of Dragons is also different from Rise of Kingdoms. I mean, if I were to summon something right outside my city to fight, it would be right outside my city. Man, I gotta walk. Y'all making me walk? How many minutes? You know, while my units are making their way over, I think it is worth mentioning that the cavalry got here first. They're really fast. I've got these units over here on the ground, infantry, good bit slower. Apparently, my ranged units over here and my magic units are way slower, but there are 4 different troop types. You've got your infantry, cavalry, you've got your marksmen, and you've also got magic units. And then also you've got flying units, by the way. So I probably have a march, or I could make a march with flying units and just show this to you real quick. Because if I take my wyvern riders, these are literally flying. They can navigate different sorts of terrain. So I had to walk around that river. Well, not my flying units, bro. They just go over the river. If there's a mountain, no, bro. Like, just fly up the mountain. Like, you don't need to go up the ramp in order to go up the mountain. You literally just fly over it. So this aspect of the terrain, I know I talked about terrain earlier, but it's really cool and really diversifies the combat. I mean, this is something I am actually very, very, very hyped about. And also, now that we're here, now that the team is assembled, I can select all these guys, and we can hit this level 2, and it might die really fast. The Darklings scale up, as I understand, between each season, but let's just swing in with all these marches. Oh yeah, way too easy. GG. Ultimately, here's what I'm trying to show you about fighting these things, which is that you've got these different artifacts that now you've equipped, and they do different things. Like, I can use this ability right over here to put a shield on nearby marches, which is really freaking cool. Now they've got a shield. Now, I think these guys were out of the radius of the shield, but whatever. That happens. And then this guy over here has an ability. It's an area of effect damage ability. So I can select that. Boom. He does his power strike. Now, some of these abilities are targeted and some are not targeted. The 2 I just used aren't targeted at all. However, these 2 abilities that charge up are the skill shots I was talking about in the beginning of the video. Also, by the way, there's range combat in the game. So you can see I started attacking this guy at range. I'm fighting him just with this one march, so I can show you that we're having a charge up over here on his ability. I am probably going to lose. Now I can use this ability, and I can target any of these marches. I'm going to heal myself. But the artifacts are just really cool, man. They change the way combat works, and it makes it feel much more like a MOBA. I mean, this is a 10 out of 10. Really cool addition that's in Call of Dragons. I shield everybody. I mean, I really like the artifact system. Very cool. If I wanted to bring multiple marches to a location, that's something I can do. I hit deploy. I hit multi-create. I select all my preset marches. I hit march. I mean, bro, I just have 5 marches pop out of my city. But unlike in Rise of Kingdoms, where this would lead to terrible cheeseburgering, popping out of your city and wrecking people that are just outside of it, being just really annoying about it, you can't do that in this game. And this is just hugely different. Combat is very, very, very different in this game for several reasons. First of all, let's talk about the stamina system. Every hero has a small amount of stamina. So you can see this hero has 100 out of 100 stamina currently, and it regenerates over time. When you fight somebody outside of your city, as soon as you hit another player, you have used up 10 of your stamina, and you only recover 12 per hour. So that means each march can leave your city and hit another player less than 10 times per hour. So the combat in this game moves at a very different pace because you can't just endlessly send out your marches. And I would argue this very much benefits free-to-play players because whales can't just run out a march over and over and over until you're just beat down. Doesn't work that way. Also, recovering your troops works very differently. In this game, hospital healing can be free. That's right, you heard it correctly. Unlike in Rise of Kingdoms, how you have limited hospital capacity, there is unlimited hospital capacity in Call of Dragons, and it happens for free over time. Your troops will just heal. Now, that said, you want them fast, you're going to have to use resources, And there is a limit to the amount of resource-based healing you can do per day. Now, that limit changes, and there are things you can do to elevate that. But the point is that field fighting needs to be more strategic, because you can't just play dumbly, run it down, and count on having more resources and speed ups than the enemy to actually win your fights. You do need to play intelligently rather than just run it down until your opponent is beat down. It works very differently in this game. And not only that, but the countering system in this game is extremely intricate and very detailed. I mean, if we get a look here at the countering system, they call it unit advantage. You've got infantry countering cavalry, cavalry countering marksmen, marksmen countering magic units, and magic units countering infantry. You deal way more damage. You take way less damage when you counter your enemy. It's actually shocking how big of a deal this is. One last thing I'll talk about with regard to being very different is that because there's no hospital capacity in this game, you can have unlimited troops in your hospital. You technically can't get zeroed in the same way that you can in Rise of Kingdoms. If your city gets attacked in Call of Dragons, whether that's a rally or a swarm, 10% of your Sev wounds die, and 50% of the enemy's Sev wounds will die. So your city defense is hugely advantaged, although every single season you do need to level up a city garrison if that's something that you are worried about, unless you stay on territory. And if you stay on territory, your city can't get attacked. But realistically, this game is so freaking chaotic, people always get caught off territory, myself included. You think everybody is singing Kumbaya and everybody's allies, and then there's a backstab, and next thing you know, a whole bunch of territory got burned up and you wake up zero. Not that that's ever happened to me. Card will be in the end screen for that. So with all that said, you can see why I started the video by saying, just because I think that Call of Dragons is a superior game, there are things you may or may not like about it compared to Rise of Kingdoms. Both are really good city builders. Both are very similar to each other. I personally think that the map and the graphics and the combat system and the artifact system in Call of Dragons is really cool. I also think that in Rise of Kingdoms, I kind of prefer the way that kingdoms are designed, the way that KvK formats work, and the way that alliances work, with them being more stable, long-term entities in Rise of Kingdoms compared to how they are in Call of Dragons. But with all that said, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I mean, I've spent $100,000 in Rise of Kingdoms, and I plan to keep spending in that game at about the same rate I've been spending at. And I plan to add Call of Dragons, and I'm going to start out big, man. I mean, I think I'm going to spend like $5,000 in the first month, which is a lot of money. But I also think this is something I'm going to be playing for a very, very long time. And if you want to join my group, the link will be in the description for the Discord server. If you want to see more information about Call of Dragons, I'll have a card in the end screen for when I got zeroed with this account, because as I was describing, there was like a crazy civil war that emerged, and who the heck knew? And I'll also have another video just giving you more of an overview of the game.